Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today we're going to talk about some big government kind of scary stuff. And this is going to be a little bit out of the norm for us because, we're going to talk about something that is actually a little bit political. And by that, I mean, we're going to talk about some potential aggression by one particular nation state. Now, we aren't going to talk about the geopolitical relationship between any countries or anything like that. What we want to focus on are a couple of very real threats and how you can prepare and mitigate against those threats.
Can I do the cat hiss noise now?
100%. Yeah. Yes. There it is. There's the aggression. There's the aggression.
But you're 100% right, because we're 40-something episodes in, and we've been very careful about getting involved in anything political, religious, anything along those lines, because that's just not what we're about. If you want to be some super partisan doomcast about how half the planet wants to murder the other half, there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts and shows about that.
That's right.
A lot of them you already watch with your true crime and serial true crime and other true crime podcasts. But today we just really want to focus on some very real and active threats that exist and how you can stay safe and prepare for those threats. It so happens that the threats we're talking about today are, I will air quote this one, mostly being perpetrated with a certain nation state that rhymes with Schmeina. Schmeina. But could be any outside foreign actor. We're not going to focus on who or why. What we want to focus on is what and what can I do about it. That's the main purpose.
That's an excellent way to put it. Good call. So really, what I want to talk about today is basically some critical infrastructure threats. And this really is like a bit of a continuation of episode 3, which was our critical infrastructure episode. So here's the deal. And you may have already heard about this as, it's been reported in a couple of like minor news outlets, but really not to the capacity that I think it deserves, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And no one is really talking about what it could mean, like ultimately what could happen. So back in mid-May, we're talking about just a handful of weeks ago, an anonymous source.
May 2025?
May 2025, like May 14th, I want to say. An anonymous source within the federal government reported that certain Chinese solar products were found to contain rogue communication devices. And it's funny because that's really all they said. It seems to me that the federal government was trying to downplay this story, but based on everything we know, here's basically an aggregate of all the news that came out so far. The U.S. and a bunch of other nations around the world purchase solar products from everywhere, but a lot of them from China. I don't know if it's mostly, but it's a whole bunch. These products include the obvious one, which is solar panels, but that's not the only thing that you need to harness solar energy. The brains behind that operation, when we're talking about solar products, is called an inverter. And in case anyone doesn't know, I don't want to talk down to anybody, but I think I just kind of want to explain this. Basically, what inverters do is they convert that high voltage DC power produced by solar panels and convert it or invert it into AC power, which is the type of electricity that our power grid runs on. So in the solar biz, we call all of this stuff the hardware package. Now, the inverters often contain some kind of communications equipment. So it's actually not that crazy that comms would be built into these, because lots of times the utilities that buy them want to be able to log in remotely if there's a problem. So there might be a router or a hub or something built into them. That's pretty normal. In that way, yeah, tech support can kind of log in like from behind their own firewall. But what they found in these inverters seems to be a lot more sinister than that. It's been reported that they discovered some cellular equipment built into these inverters that was undisclosed to the US power companies that had purchased these inverters. So, like a modem, like a cell phone built into these things. And on top of that, Reuters reported that, and I'm using quotes, I'm quoting Reuters right now, over the past 9 months, undocumented communication devices, including cellular radios, have been found in some batteries from multiple Chinese suppliers. So, not just the inverters, but also the storage devices and things we know about batteries, especially lithium ion batteries, lithium iron phosphate. They are explosive. So, an anonymous source did not downplay the severity of this situation, and this is within the federal government. They said, and I'm quoting, that effectively means there is a built-in way to physically destroy the US power grid.
That's beyond terrifying. Like,
right?
Holy shit.
Think
Batman.
about this, that we are talking about all these devices that are currently plugged into the US power grid, whether it's batteries, whether it's inverters, all of these things that are in the grid. And federal officials believe that someone could dial up and destroy them.
That's the power grid on speed dial. Just shut it down. We're
power
good.
Grid on speed
we
dial.
don't need to do anything with this sunlight. We're just done sending it to the grid. Like, that's absolutely terrifying. And I can tell you from my time in the Army working with some critical infrastructure in the satellite communications world, I mean, these kind of security vulnerabilities are just as serious as a heart attack. And the thing that really stands out to me here is that we're not talking about putting up firewalls and protecting against hacking. It's not black hat versus white hat, spy versus spy. The door is already quite literally open, and the hacking has already been done. It's the Trojan horse in here, and the Greeks are already spilling out onto the streets of Troy. At this point, they can't stop it, but I assume we know what manufacturer we're talking about, so we can just kind of like take those particular inverters offline. Like, you need a replacement module, we'll pay for it, blah, blah, blah. Is that accurate at all?
Well, so it's interesting. I dug around the internet quite a bit, and I couldn't find which particular manufacturers they found these rogue comm devices in. And I think that's on purpose. I assume they know exactly which ones they're in, but they just don't want to tell the public, because you could drive by your local utility company and say, there's one. So I just think maybe they're not talking about it. But I did find something very interesting in an article from November of last year in a slightly obscure German news outlet. A company called Dye, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but it's a Chinese company, DEYE. They had switched off inverters that were located in Germany and Pakistan and in the US. So it's crazy. This was discovered by a German blogger who had one of their inverters for like a home grid tied project that had just stopped working all of a sudden. And so this blogger contacted the manufacturer to get tech support. And they told this blogger, make sure the inverter switched on so we can remotely log into it.
Wait. So the person who was calling tech support had no idea that there were remote communications equipment built into the inverter that they had in their home, presumably networked into their entire home network, and the company just said, we'll log in and take a look?
That's exactly. They probably did it in like a Chinese accent, but that's exactly what they said. So, and here's why I think this story didn't get a lot of play in the US. It's it's because these inverters, these DIE equipment, they're not allowed in the US or Germany or Pakistan where they were all shut down. And so the company that makes them just turned them all off. They said they're not. I think it must have been like a FCC standard and maybe like the German and Pakistan equivalent of those, but basically they found their equipment on the network, geolocated it, and said, "Hey, that equipment isn't allowed in these in these countries because of whatever laws there are." And so they just turned them all off. And by the way, we'll post all this. Like, I'm not making this up. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. I've got links to all these credible news stories, credible news sources, and we will post all of that stuff in the blog for this week's episode on our website.
Yes, all of our research, anywhere that we go, unless it's something that we cannot remember where we got the source because it's just ingrained in our brains at this point. But any links, anything that we say, hey, we'll post the link, that is going to be on stakeholderprepping.com. And we do have a detailed analysis of each episode if you are trying to figure out which ones you might have time for or might want to prioritize. Check out our website, stakeholderprepping.com. We do carry a blog there. The top 3 episodes, the most recent 3 episodes, are going to be at the very top. And if you want to look through and see what the description says and then decide from there whether it's worth your time or not, any and all links to our research are going to be on there.
Yeah, anything that's a good point. And we don't always remember, like, sometimes, because we'll have to go back and scrub the episode ourselves and be like, oh yeah, what was that other link we wanted to post? But pretty much anything we talk about, we put in the blog. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of our website, stakeholderprepping.com, scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see there's a spot there where you can put in your email address and you can get our weekly blog update. And I want to make sure everybody knows we don't link spam anybody. If you put your email address in there and subscribe, you will get exactly 1 email a week from us. No more, no less. You will get the blog for that week's episode and a link to listen to it on Spotify, and then all of the stuff that we're talking about. So, yeah, just so people know. But yeah, like this story that I'm talking about right now, that'll be on there. And it's so funny. Like, I don't speak German, but I love reading German headlines because you can almost know what they say. It's like this one, I'm not kidding. It's like Die Risken Photovoltaic Solar Lagen. I'm like, I think I know exactly what that means.
So here's kind of the thing that I'm finding weird about this is, yes, Chinese company that was responsible for manufacturing everything, they admitted, oh, we've got cellular networks inside of our solar panels, so we're going to shut them down because they're not allowed by the US or the FCC or the European equivalent. I cannot remember that acronym off the top of my head for the life
whatever
of me
the
right
EU's
now.
equivalent to FCC is, the EULA or whatever it is.
So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did this vlogger, did he report that he needed assistance, and that's what tipped off the EU to say, hey, these are no longer allowed? Or was his service shut off because the EU said this is no longer allowed and he had already contraband equipment?
Yeah, that's what I don't know. Like, if the EU said, hey, we're in the know and we know that this thing shouldn't be here, and reported back somehow, or if the Chinese companies just saw them operating in countries they're not allowed to operate in, and maybe they didn't want to get sanctioned or fees or fines or whatever. So they just like shut those things down and said, hey, you gray marketed this thing. It's not supposed to be hooked into the European power grid. And by the way, we see some in Pakistan, we see some in the US. So let's just flip the switch and turn them off and, basically remotely destroy them. I don't know. But it's funny that was way back in November. that this blogger found this thing. And then it wasn't until May that the US, I want to say it was the US utility companies, were doing like spot checks on their equipment. They like oftentimes just open up the equipment they buy, I think just to kind of check for stuff like this, just to make sure there's not like, any hackery or, cocaine being smuggled in or something. And that's when they found this. And that's when it sort of came out. And it was still very much under the radar. Like, there have been a couple of these like official, I think, statements on it, but not a lot. And this is the craziest thing.
So real quick, before you jump into that,
Yeah.
I would argue let's follow your mantra here, because I was recently listening to some older episodes. Let's follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
So why would a utility company be interested in inspecting anybody's solar panels? Follow the money. It all comes back to how much can they bleed off into their own battery banks that they no longer have to pay for because it's not registered.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about like maybe a utility company doing something sinister here. I was just thinking that they were going, let's make sure there's nothing hackery in here. So
I want to give
maybe
equal judgment to all until somebody earns it.
Let's judge everybody. So anyway, here's the thing. This DIE company, or whatever, DEYE, this company, this is the craziest thing too. They don't just make inverters, like just the solar application thing. They make inverters for wind turbine applications and inverters for electric and hybrid vehicle charging stations. So it sounds like these things could be like all over the grid in every different aspect of our life. There could be these rogue communications equipment hooked up to parts of our power grid. Now, let me tell you about a few other stories that are maybe parallels to this that have been confirmed by U.S. House Select Committees. And these select committees, they reported that cranes that were being used at U.S. ports had the same communications equipment embedded in them. So this goes all the way back like early last year, like more than a year and a half ago. There's a quote I found from, and again, this is a totally bipartisan joint House Committee on Homeland Security. Here's the quote. An investigation by the House Homeland Security Committee found that cranes made by China and installed at U.S. ports included communications equipment put in place without explanation. The investigation, which was also conducted by the House Select Committee on China, focused on 200 Chinese-made cranes at U.S. ports and facilities that included undocumented cellular modems that can be used for remote communication. Now, that's just nuts, right? This is like, we're talking about like maximum overdrive stuff. Like, what could they possibly do?
Oh, it's very unnerving. And I think it is important to point out that right now we're all kind of worked up about this. Like, we're not trying to fearmonger here. We're not just trying to tell you that the sky is falling. I promise we are not Chicken Little. My head is too big for that. It has been since like 5th grade. But if we can bring it back for a minute just to get off of the conspiracy theories, because they're so tempting and juicy and just like, it's right there like a steak.
Look at that rabbit hole. I want to get in it.
Oh, man. But ultimately, what we want to do in this episode is identify a threat and then talk about ways to mitigate it. So, have we identified a threat yet?
I think so. We have identified that, yes, our utility grid could not just be shut down, but maybe even weaponized against us.
I would say we entered that threat period in 2005, 2007. I can't remember when the Stuxnet virus.
Yeah, Stuxnet was like the first time that something in the not physical realm destroyed something in the physical realm. And I guess we still don't really know who did that. But yeah, you're right. Stuxnet or minute 3 of this podcast.
We don't know, air quotes, we don't know who did the Stuxnet virus. For anyone not familiar, Stuxnet was a physical USB-like device, unconfirmed, but it was a physical device that was embedded into a nuclear reactor computer in Iran. And all of a sudden, they're
centrifuges. They spun up, right? They spun up out of control. Isn't that what happened?
No, they were spinning, and they were reporting that they were continually spinning at like 20,000 RPMs or whatever it was, when in reality, they were varying the speed and damaging the equipment. So it would report that it was saying 20,000 RPMs. I'm consistently going however fast you wanted me to be. I'm varying all the way down to 500 RPMs versus 6,000 versus another 450 RPMs versus
until they just broke them.
Until we just broke them.
Yeah, that is like, it's maximum overdrive stuff.
It really is.
It's crazy.
So we definitely have identified a threat, but how do we mitigate it? So have we made the case that there is the slightest probability of a foreign actor disturbing our grid?
Yes, I believe so, and you're exactly right. Let's not crawl down the rabbit hole, even though I want to. Let's move on to the what can I do about it phase, right? So, and that, honestly, here's the thing. It sounds terrifying, right? Like that a foreign actor could just push a button and the power grid could explode. But I think there is quite a bit we can do about it. And I think the absolute worst case here is that the grid could be taken down, or, like I said, possibly weaponized. And what do I mean by that? I mean that what if it wasn't just turned off, but what if you could project power surges from the power grid? What if we could, overload circuits and have cascading failures, which is something that they say our power grid is very susceptible to. If you remember, we talked about Dr. Jennifer Hesterman, and she talks about how if you took down just the right handful of substations, you could really cause a bunch of problems because our power grid could cascade, right? So let's talk
100%.
about, that's crazy, but let's talk about what we can do to stay safe if something like that happens. And there are a few products I think we can talk about, stuff you can have on hand to mitigate any potential grid down scenario.
And you're 100% right. There are a lot of products out there. Again, detaching temporarily from the reality and going into the conspiracy theory, you're hitting on something that I've known about since the late 90s, which was called a blotto box in the original Anarchist Cookbook. And it's absolutely terrifying. It doesn't apply as much anymore, but back in the 90s, there were plans to electrocute anybody who answered their phone on an overcharged overwire for the normal phone company.
Oh, right, because back in the day, phones, like, it was what caused the phone to ring was a power surge, right? And when the phone picked up, then it went to like 6 volts or something really low. But yeah, you're right. If you could send that same power surge while someone was attached to it, you could at very least shock them, right?
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, but there were tests done in the early 2000s before everyone switched over to cellular communication as their primary. There were tests done that showed that just 36 volts through a landline could electrocute and stop your heart. So a blotto box, in theory, I've never seen it done, but a blotto box in theory could wipe out an entire area code if it's all on the same switch, but it has to be landlines only.
Right, and now we really don't have those. You're just basically killing old people that are waiting for like the Publishers Clearinghouse to call or something like that, right?
Yeah, thank God we didn't post this podcast 30 years ago.
Right. Oh yeah.
A lot of people would be dead.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. And if you have been listening to us for any length of time, from like anywhere episode 2 on, we do come back to a lot of the same stuff. So 2 weeks worth of food, for the entire family, all the pets, whether they poop on themselves or not, and you have to give them 4 showers a day or not, they're still family members. If you can't tell, I'm a little bitter about that one.
Yeah, sounds like you had a rough day.
Water, a gallon a day per person, medications, first aid, etc. But let's talk about a few other products that you could have on hand specifically if the grid went down, not because of a natural disaster, but because the switch got flipped or an overload or surge, car accident, even knocking out a transformer. If it was launched by some kind of cyber attack or physical attack, one thing that comes to mind for me, I really can't believe we haven't talked about this one yet, is the water bob or the aquapod. And again,
Oh,
two
yeah.
different things along the same lines. They're very, very cool devices. They're super inexpensive pieces of gear. If you were looking to really plus up your prepping arsenal and what you have in your own toolbox, this is precisely what you've been looking for the person who has everything. It's basically a giant water bladder that lays in your bathtub, but you can fill it with the faucet in your tub. In most cases, they hold about 100 gallons of drinking water, and it's pretty easily deployed. You just lay it out in your tub and then hook it up to the faucet or hold it up there. And you can drain it when you don't need it. So for this type of scenario where the grid goes down, but you're not, it's not because of an earthquake or natural disaster, the grid is still down. So the water pumps are still down. So you're still going to lose water pressure. If you've listened to any of our episodes talking about secondary and tertiary effects, the grid goes down. The pumps to pump water up into the water towers no longer have power. Can't get the water up there. Eventually it loses pressure. You run out of fresh drinking water. It's kind of a step A, step B, step C, secondary, tertiary. It's going to happen if that grid ever fails. But what you can do with these is immediately, as soon as that power shuts off, that water pressure is still going to be working for some amount of time. And until that pressure in the lines fails, you can deploy one of these and fill it. So you run out of power because of a bad storm or because of a cyber attack or because somebody ran off the road and hit a transformer. It doesn't really matter. It's going to take time to fix. You can instantly, as soon as you hear about it, fill up one of these water bobs or these aquapods in your bathtub. And then all you're doing is changing where you're getting fresh water for cooking and things like that from your kitchen sink to your main bathroom. It's as easy as that.
Yeah, that's a really good. I can't believe we haven't talked about those yet because it is such a great thing to have, and like they're less than $30. So you're right. There are times when to use them. I think maybe like the earthquake where maybe the water lines are compromised or something like that, and there wouldn't be water pressure, wouldn't be a time to use that. Or when there could be contaminants in the public drinking water system, wouldn't be a time to use that. But something like this where grid shuts off and there's still pressure in the lines, it's basically like 100-gallon giant Ziploc bag that's the shape of your tub, right? I mean, that's basically what this thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a waterbed for your tub.
It's a waterbed for your tub. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's a really good thing just to have on hand. I mean, yeah, you should go to Amazon. Everybody, go to Amazon right now, buy one of these things, less than $30, and then you're protected, at least with your drinking water. 100 gallons, like we said, a gallon a day per person is like ideal. That's a lot of days. You know, if you've got a household of 3, that's a month in the bathtub. And these are made of it's like, food grade polymer or whatever, right? Like you can put water in these and it doesn't taste like it's got plastic in it or whatever. So yeah, these are great. Now, another thing I want to talk about a little bit is alternative power. And I don't want to go hard on this. I probably will end up talking for a lot because I do love alternative power, man. You know how I am. But I think we could do an entire episode on each of the different types of alternative power. But right now, I want to talk about how to know the amount of power you use and then how to properly size your generator or like a solar generator. So this is pretty easy. And I'm going to try to post some links to this so you don't have to like do math on the fly. But here's the thing. The first thing you need to know is how much power your critical load is. And by critical load, what I mean is the things you absolutely need to survive. This could be your well. This could be your freezer. This could be your refrigerator. This could be your CPAP machine, or maybe it's grandma's oxygen generator. And you need a little left over to charge your cell phone and maybe at least a radio, if not a television or something like that, right? Now, unless you're already off grid, you might not have one of these, but for somewhere between 150 and 250 bucks, you can get something called a whole home energy monitor. And there's 1,000 different of the kinds of these on Amazon. But these things, they're all over the internet, very easy to find. I would recommend one, like an actual name brand one. Siemens is a really good one. They have something called their in-hab smart home energy monitor. And this thing is really cool. What they do is it's a little magic box with a bunch of other little magic boxes connected to it. And what you do is you connect them to the breaker panel in your home. And you could even use these like in an apartment. And it may, I'm using air quotes, may take an electrician. Chris, can you give me a disclaimer real quick?
All of this information is designated for entertainment use only and should be used as such.
That was solid. I like the computer voice. But so I did one myself. Very easy. And you're not actually plugging anything in. What you're doing is you're sort of installing these little things over the individual circuits in your breaker box. And really all you have to do is throw the main breaker at your house, so all the power's out, and then you can touch all these individual circuits. And what this allows you to do is monitor everything in your home, all the electricity in your home and every appliance from an app on your phone, and exactly how much power each individual circuit in your home uses. And these things are pretty smart. Like they know like the exact sine wave of like a refrigerator compressor. And so they can tell you, even though you've got a bunch of stuff plugged into that same circuit, they can say, hey, here's how much power your refrigerator uses. Now, you can know exactly how much power like your TV uses a month or your LED lights, basically anything that's plugged into any circuit of your home. And even outside of apocalyptic scenarios, these will tell you how much money you spend every month on certain things that draw electricity in your home. So if you pay 10 cents a kilowatt hour for your power and you use 200 kilowatt hours a month powering your 4 TVs, that's $20 a month. Now, if you just turn off half of your TVs, now you've got an extra $10 to spend on 30 carbine. So
of course we've got something to spend it on already.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. No, I've already got the money spent. You're saving, trust me. But
that is kind of wild. Like I don't even think about it because it's just the home. But when I look at our utility bill, it's 27 cents per kilowatt hour that we use. It's ridiculous.
It's crazy high, and you don't know what the big draws are. Like you can guess, but if you had it on your phone on an app and you said, oh, hey, look, while I'm at work every day, my wife is leaving the kitchen light on all the time or something, like there's all this stuff. You could actually look at your energy usage and know exactly what those big draws are in your home. And then you can just like smartly mitigate that stuff. I don't know if smartly is a word. So, but here's what I'm getting at. If you're worried about the grid going down and you want to go buy a gas generator or a solar generator, it's important to know what you're powering and how much power you need. If you have, say, if you got to run a well or something big, you're going to need a gas generator. But if you have enough water, like the water Bob Chris just talked about, you could get away with like a solar battery system, what they call like a solar generator, right? As long as you size it correctly. And that's why having this home power monitor is key, because you'll find that your power consumption varies widely depending on like the season. So
I I would say absolutely on that because in the summer we have a fridge in the garage that we use to keep drinks in, and you
it's
know,
working way harder. The beer fridge is
oh,
working way harder in the summer, 100%.
there's like condensation coming off of the freezer panel just because it's working so hard.
And maybe the heat pump is working more in the summer, and maybe you're not a baseboard furnace guy, so maybe you've got propane or natural gas or a wood stove or something, so you're not using a ton of power on the life support system in your house in the winter, right? So it's really cool to see the stuff on your app, and I'm telling you, for like $150, you can install this and know all of this stuff. So I'm going to do some very quick math on the solar generator. And a lot of our listeners have asked about this. They're like, can you do an episode on like solar power stuff? And I want to. This is not that. I'm not getting out of the solar panel episode. This is just a real quick down and dirty, okay? So let's say, for the sake of argument, and this is pretty close, that the modern fridge freezer combo takes about 100 watts. That's 100 watt hours to operate, or 100 watts an hour basically to operate, right? If you think about that, that's what it took to run the light bulb in the refrigerator when we were kids. And just so you know, the light bulb does not stay on when you close the door. And you can find that out by closing it from the inside. There's your pro tip. But if you remember, as a kid, that little light bulb, that was an incandescent light bulb. That thing was 100 watts. That's how much your entire fridge compressor takes to power now. So that's what's really cool. But power consumption technology has just come so far. And there's these all-in-one solar generators. But making sure that you size them appropriately is key. So for the sake of argument, I just picked one of the super popular ones on Amazon. It's called the Jackery 1070. So it's 1070 watt hours, and it's got a 200 watt fold out solar panel. And that's enough under ideal conditions, like laboratory ideal conditions, to run that 100 watt fridge for about 10 hours, because it's 1,000 watt hours. You've got a 100 watt hour fridge, 10 hours, right? Does that math make sense? So
It does.
Okay. And now you've got a 200 watt solar panel. So that means you can charge your battery, again, under ideal laboratory conditions, not taking into account conversion loss and all this other kind of crazy stuff, in about 5 hours. 200 watt hour solar panel times 5 hours, that's 1,000 watt hours. That's how big the battery is in this thing. So that math makes sense to everybody, right? That's like very square rounded math here. But that's if you're not using it. So let's say you've got 12 hours of unobstructed daylight. So it's, the equinox maybe. And you're making 2,400 watt hours with those panels. Again, absolute ideal conditions. And when it's brand new. That's enough to run your refrigerator and charge the battery from zero and have about 400 watts left over to play with. So you can charge a couple of cell phones and maybe run a radio or something like that. But remember, that battery only has enough to run your fridge for 10 hours. So if this is a 12-hour daylight and 12-hour darkness kind of day, in the winter, it's going to be even worse. So people think that they're going to just sit around and watch TV and run their microwave, and they're going to be fine using one of these off-the-shelf $800 solar generators. And unfortunately, it's just not the case. There's obviously things you can do to mitigate this, right? You don't need to run the fridge freezer combo all the time. But I guess what I'm getting at here, Chris, is having a plan to deal with it, because I just showed you the math that it doesn't work. You're going to go spend $800 on that Jackery thing, and you're going to say, man, I've got everything I need to run everything, all my critical loads in the house. And I just showed you that you don't have enough to run your fridge for 24 hours a day. That thing will only run a 100 watt refrigerator for 22 hours a day and nothing else. So just having the plan, right? Because basically having the plan on how you're going to live without all this stuff before you just walk down to the FEMA camp the second the power goes out.
And I really do like how you spelled it out there because I'm fairly math proficient. I'm I'm okay with numbers, but looking at that and understanding how it relates to, oh, my frozen goods can only be above 40 degrees for 4 hours before they go bad.
Right.
That completely changes my perspective on that Jackery solar generator. And we have Jackery products. We both have an emergency jump pack that we keep with us that goes into the tornado shelter and comes out, gets charged every week while we're in tornado season, anywhere from basically January through November. So December is the only time it's not on the charger. They make good products, but the
Oh yeah,
math just does not support it.
I'm not discrediting them. They great products. I just think that people look at what I can purchase and say, "Oh, this is called a, home standby solar generator and it's the most popular one." When I go to Amazon and Google uh home solar generators, this is the one that Amazon says, "We recommend this one for you." So people go buy it and they go on sale, and it's probably a good deal when it goes on sale. You've got these awesome solar panels to go with it, but you need to practice your preps because you just don't know if this is going to power everything you need it to. So it's just about sizing it correctly. And that's why I brought you back to if you had one of these home energy monitors, you'd know exactly how big of a solar generator you need.
And that's another good point about bringing up how what it says on the ticket does not necessarily equate to what you see in real life. When is the last time you got the EPA recommended miles per gallon out of your vehicle?
Oh yeah, who knows, right? Because I'm the one that always shuts off the little button that says, "Do you want us to turn off at every stoplight?" Yeah, I'm turning that thing off. So you're right. No, I don't think I get the EPA MPG out of my vehicle. Definitely not.
Not to mention, we go back to the M16A1 that was introduced in Vietnam, and under laboratory conditions, they were marketed as a self-cleaning rifle. It never had to be
Okay.
cleaned. Great.
Okay.
Fantastic. It worked in laboratory conditions and, well, Colt. And I'm a big Colt fan because they are worth some money. But Colt sold this idea to the US military that this is such a great tool under laboratory conditions. Why would you not want this in the field? And then you get a little bit of dirt, a little bit of dust, a little bit of mud, blood,
Right.
anything you mix into it, and it fails under field conditions.
We tested it in a desert made out of synthetic gun oil sand.
In a clean environment where you didn't need any oil. Like,
in a class 10,000 clean room, it cleans itself.
exactly, it cleans itself. Just remember, when you are ordering things offline, you are the field experiment.
Yep.
Especially if it's newer technology like these solar generators or I will say Generac kind of has their shit together when it comes to building a generator.
100%. 100%. Generac is, yeah.
You
absolutely.
are going to pay for it out the nose if you go with it.
Yep.
Is it worth it? That's going to come down to your risk matrix. Can you live without power for 5 hours, or do you have 5 kids screaming that their individual tablets are not connecting to the Wi-Fi and you need to fix it because mommy, help?
Yeah, and this home standby generator stuff, I mean, that's the thing. If you're running a well, then you absolutely do need a real generator. And if you look at those, like, yeah, that Generac, maybe that's a $4,000 or $5,000 generator, but that's not including maybe you need to install another propane tank in your home, and it's the install, and then you've got these automatic transfer switches and all that stuff that it gets very, very expensive. And I'll tell you, I actually I got a quote on installing the home standby generator, and I think it was a Generac, and it was, I want to say the price tag on that thing was, maybe it was $5,000, but by the time that thing is working and connected to your house, it was $16,000 because it was the Generac. And then they're like, well, it's going to cost, however many thousands of dollars to plumb it to your propane tank, or we can just install another propane tank. And you really want the buried propane tank. And by the time you throw in the free toaster and the undercoating, it's like the price quadruples.
Oh, absolutely. That's what it did to our solar panels when we were living in Colorado. It
Sure.
was 20,000 for the actual solar panels themselves. Great.
Yep.
Pile install fees and hookup fees and everything else on top of that that's mandated by the government, and all of a sudden it's a $65,000 project that we dumped in, and it cut our utility bill in half for the time that we were there. So how long are you going to be there? Is it worth installing that
Right.
generator or getting something that's portable?
And that wasn't I mean, you weren't off grid at that point either. You just had a cheaper utility bill. So for this exercise, that really wouldn't have even helped you if the grid went down, even though you're generating some amount of power. So yeah, I think we need to do like a standby power, a solar type episode, but that was just kind of my quick and dirty precursor of that. Can you think of any other products, Chris, that would help in this type of situation, like the grid down, the weaponized power grid type thing?
So really the thing that comes to mind here, and arguably the most important way that you can potentially mitigate against a, like you said, weaponized power grid, is to have a home surge protector. These are actually pretty inexpensive. You can get a quality one for around $100. But the labor for an electrician to come out and wire it in correctly, that could be a couple $100 depending on where you are. So anywhere from, I would say, 400 to 800 to wire the thing in.
Yeah, it could be less than that. I mean, yeah, it depends on. I really don't think it's that much time out of electrician. If you got an accessible panel and you're not a super long trip fee, you may be able to get that done for just maybe $300-400.
Yeah, if the electrician will accept third party products, because some will
right.
not.
Yeah. If you're going buying your own, yeah, that's right.
Now, from an insurance perspective, this is actually a very important prep. Even if we aren't talking about the foreign nation state weaponizing or bringing our power grid down against us, but kind of a maximum overdrive final destination crossover here.
It does sound terrifying, doesn't it?
It really is just a good idea for anyone to have a whole home surge protector installed. It's going to protect your equipment. It's going to protect you from shocks. It's going to protect that data loss, which, for anyone who doesn't know, I am in the insurance industry. We'll just reiterate that. I just had to complete my continuing education requirements for this year for my licensing. And apparently 90% of all realized losses of business are from not having their data backed up. So if that can do it to a business, what can it do to you?
Oh wow. So it's just like the records loss is huge. Like if you've got all your stuff on a computer and you get hit with a massive power surge, then all that stuff's gone.
It's fried, it's kapoof, it's gone, it's in the air. And there are very, very few companies that will protect against power surge, especially your personal belongings like your TV, your computer, anything along those lines. Most policies have a specific exclusion for anything that has a tube, microchip, or transistor. So if you are lucky enough to have one of those policies that does have power surge protection, definitely worth the endorsement on your policy. It's worth the extra $10 to $15 a year to protect everything, because it's not common. But your insurance actuary who sets the pricing, they know that. And computers, TV, other sensitive electronics, before anyone says home surge protector won't save you from an EMP or giant weaponized power surge, you're probably right. An EMP is completely different. But here's the really cool thing about insurance, and I am speaking very broadly, so you do have to read your specific policy. A lot of policies have language about being your duty to mitigate if you install a home surge protector and your electronics are damaged anyways. So if you install it and it gets damaged anyways, more often than not, you're protected if you have that endorsement. You've done your duty to protect. There may be a clause in there that covers your electronics, even if they are damaged because you did not do your duty. But that's a tough one to say.
So
Do
so
your
you're
duty.
saying that like if I've got my computer plugged in and there's a giant weaponized power surge like we're talking about, computer's fried, I'm SOL. But if I install one of these home surge protectors and that whole thing still happens, my insurance company may not deny that claim. They may actually pay me for my computer, even though power surges are excluded, because I did my duty to protect them. Like I did the best I could. And so that policy may still cover the stuff that it says it wouldn't cover.
It may, and you would have to talk
Interesting.
with your agent over it,
Okay.
but it would be seen as the same as applying blue tarps to your roof after
Oh,
damage before the rains hit.
that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So you're doing your duty to mitigate that. And if the insurance company looks at it and said, hey, you did your best. So that kind of thing could be covered. One thing that's funny, I was looking at my policy and it says something about like acts of terrorism or acts of war are excluded. Is that a normal thing?
That is a very normal thing post 2011, or I'm
Uh,
sorry, post 2001. So
oh, this is a September 11th thing.
it is. And a lot of people
Oh.
don't realize that if you, let's take what's kind of going on in the world right now. If you have an attack on your home where the National Guard or active duty troops have to come in under orders, so under legal orders, we will assume they have an entirely legal assumption to be there, but they are
Mhm.
using your house as a staging point or as a communications hub or anything like that. Generally, the damages that they cause are not covered, but the government would still have to pay you for use of your residence to cover those
Oh.
damages. So
Yeah.
we get into kind of a Fourth Amendment tease match between
Yeah.
insurance companies and the government.
But yeah, so what you're saying is that things can be excluded anyway because acts of terrorism or acts of war or governmental action. But it's better to be safe than sorry. And even if you don't like, I don't have a home standby surge protector thing. I absolutely should because it is very inexpensive. But I do have. I'm thinking about it now. I have most of my electronics on their own surge protector. You know, like my computer, like my DVR for my cameras is on a we talked about that in like my weird preps episode, but like the uninterrupted power source, so I kind of have a little battery backup there too. I have most of my stuff on a surge protector. I'm actually now in my head thinking about what are the things I don't have on their own individual surge protector. Definitely like the refrigerator, because why would you? It's plugged into the wall. And that's one of those times when, yeah, the home standby surge protector could actually save those kinds of things because a refrigerator isn't just a compressor anymore. The reason it's so much more efficient, like I talked about, is because it's riddled with like microchips and stuff now and planned obsolescence and probably Chinese cellular modems.
So, on that, I will say if you're trying to do this on a budget and trying to get a whole home uninterruptible power supply, make friends with one, a mechanic, and two, an electrician, and take them to you pull and pay or pull apart or whatever junkyard you want to pay for the ice cream, beer, and pizza to go to, and pull batteries from a Tesla that's been wrecked. If those
Oh,
batteries
yeah.
are still good, you can build an uninterruptible power supply for about a fifth of what it would take. And if you know your licensed electrician that can do it for you, all you do is pay the permit fee to the city and have them install that in your home.
Yeah, big Tesla battery, cool. I don't know what voltage those are. I do know that like the Cybertrucks have the ability to like backfeed your home, and I think the new Ford Lightnings do that as well. Like they have the ability to backfeed your home and use them as a home standby battery. I don't know what the voltage is because like I have a big standby home battery system, which I would love to talk about in a future episode because it is a massive undertaking to be able to just flip a switch and say my entire home runs off a battery, right? I have like the build your own power wall, but my batteries are much lower voltage. I'm running a 48-volt system. I want to say that like electric cars, I think they're like a very high voltage, and someone will hopefully correct me or we could look it up, but I want to say they're hundreds of volts. I don't believe they are low voltage systems like a 12, 24, 48 thing. I think they're a whole lot higher
They
voltage.
they can't be a lower voltage because they, from my experience, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have an inverter to convert the engine cycling over to power. But a lot of them do have 120-volt power available, 110-volt, um, so that you can run electronics by just plugging them into the three-pronged jack that they have in the vehicle. So I believe they're 120 to 130 volts,
I'm looking up.
but
So AI, we let's not trust AI all the time, but AI says depending on the model, the voltage can be between 350 and 800 volts. So they're
holy
super
shit.
super high voltage. And the reason they do that, the reason you go for higher voltage is because then you have like smaller cable diameter because you have lower amperage, right? So that's that amps times
Right.
volts equals watts thing or whatever. But yeah, so basically if you have higher voltage, then you're running way lower amperage to get the same amount of power, and you're running much smaller cables. So you think about, you know, the amount of power you can run on your home off a 120 volt system versus a 12 volt car battery lead is going to be this massive cable. So yeah, you want higher voltage, but yeah, that's very high. So depending on the model, between 350 and 800 volts, it's crazy. So yeah, that's a ton of energy in an old Tesla battery. That would be a very cool thing to do, and then you could convert that into, you know, AC, and yeah, obviously you could backfeed your whole home.
Kind of makes me wonder how long any Tesla battery or any electric vehicle battery could actually run a refrigerator for. Are we looking at
Oh, I
like
think a
how many
very
kilowatt hours could one of those battery banks actually provide if that was its only critical
I think
resource?
it's a ton. I think it would be forever. I mean, we could do the math. I could do the math easily for you. But if you think about like the amount of energy it takes to move a vehicle, and by the way, like a Tesla or any EV, they're super heavy because they're carrying around their own fuel source, because they're carrying these massively heavy batteries. So to move those for that amount of mileage and how quick they are, yeah, I think that if you were just taking a battery like that and just running a refrigerator or a deep freezer, dude, I think you could run one forever.
See, I would argue the opposite because as soon as that compressor kicks on, that sine wave current from that wattage overload is going to say, nope, we broke it. We're not going to break it
Oh,
anymore.
yeah, there's definitely a brain inside. Yeah, you're right. There's a brain inside of all those batteries. But if you brought that voltage and brought it into see, that's the thing. I think inverters, I would love to know how the Tesla, it's not the power wall, it's like the thing that converts your Cybertruck into like plugging into your home and using it as a battery. I would love to know what like the voltage conversion is on those. Because, for example, you know, I've got a 48 volt to, you know, 220 inverter. Um, I've never seen
Direct
anything.
current to AC.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so to power your home off batteries, basically. But I've never seen a battery, or sorry, an inverter that can take like that high of voltage. Like if you look like the standard off the shelf ones, like the Outbacks and the Aims and all these Chinese ones that have all these modules built in, you really don't see them higher than 48 volts. And a 48 volt one is like, you know, it could handle like 52 volts. I think my stuff, when it's maxed out, it's like at 55 volts. So it's got to be some special Tesla only, fancy inverter that handles these really, really high voltage systems. Because if you look online, you're just not going to find anything that high of voltage.
Yeah, there is always the step down transformer for $12 on Amazon, but
Yeah.
if you really need to go that way,
that will catch fire so quickly. But again, that's all the other stuff you're talking about is when you start talking about that. And this is why I do want to do another episode on this, because then you're talking about things called conversion loss. Every time you convert that energy, and it's kind of like what I was talking about with that Jackery system. So think about it this way. The sun has some amount of energy and it comes into a solar panel. And that solar panel is not 100% efficient. It is 80% efficient. And then that panel goes into a charge controller. And that charge controller is 90 something percent efficient. And it goes into the battery. And the battery storage technology is 90 something percent efficient. And then that goes into an inverter. And now that inverter has some amount of conversion loss. It's 80 or 90% efficient, or maybe it's 95% efficient. But even if all four of those steps are super efficient, even if every one of those is 95 or 96% efficient, do the math on that. That what I just gave you, from the energy into the solar panel to plug it into your wall, you're 80% less, or you're 20% off the top of that.
you're talking about taxes hitting your paycheck.
That's right. It's energy taxes, man. That's exactly right. When you talk about your power budget, you have to think about the conversion loss of every one of those steps down the line. And when you look at those Jackery systems, they don't do that for you. They don't. They say this is a 200-watt solar panel, and this is a 100-watt-hour battery, or 1,000-watt-hour battery, and this inverter is a 1,500-watt inverter. But they don't actually provide you all of that conversion loss that happens down the line.
No, and that's something that you absolutely must calculate yourself. I don't know of a single system that can help calculate it for you without putting in a little bit of elbow grease and understanding what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's right. No, you got to do the math yourself on those kinds of things.
100%. So, AC, I think that about wraps up our hour of actual time spent on this. We will do another episode, but any closing comments before we depart?
No, this was really fun. I would like to hear from people if they like us going down some of the current event rabbit hole-y stuff, because it's not really our style. You know what I mean, Chris? We like to provide solid, actionable intel that you can come back to and listen to over and over again, with no political theater and none of the religious BS that's out there. But in this episode, we really are talking about a certain nation state, like you said, that rhymes with Shmina, that is actually perpetrating some of these things. And we're obviously going to focus on the what can I do about it, not the who and the why stuff. But I would like to know from people if this is the kind of thing that you would like to hear more of, or you're like, nah, man, stay in your lane, bro.
Yes. So stakeholderprepping@gmail.com. If you want to send us some feedback on this, we would love to get it. Positive, negative, indifferent, or any other way. But definitely join us for next week. We are in hurricane season in earnest. It is after June 1st of 2025. So we are in hurricane season. Join us next week, and we're going to be discussing prepping for hurricanes. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder.